It is 8:30. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the last week of the Bordeaux box, Bordeaux month. And as Heidi talked about, super excited to open this guy up and wrap it up with this guy. Little bird on the label. 2010 Domaine Chante-Allouette-Cormeil Emillion Grand Cru is what we're tasting today. That's right, 2010 14-year-old wine is what we're tasting today. I sent the email out, but most of you who live in DC did not get this bottle initially. So you have to go pick it up from your wine club, wine captain. So if you don't have this bottle and you're wondering where the hell it is, your wine captain has it. So please reach out to your wine captain and coordinate a pickup. But I was hoping that you would all gotten it by now. So hopefully you guys do all have it. So anyway, sorry about that inconvenience this month, but little supply issues and I didn't get enough quantity available. And then the container landed late. So we had to pick up the remaining balance later in the month. So that's what happened. Anyways, just a few announcements. Case Club is next week. So that will open up with a Bordeaux box. The next month is also a Riesling box 2.0. So last time we did a Riesling box, we did all Mosel wines, right? All 4 Mosel wines at a progressive residual sugar or ripeness level, right? This time we're going to do something a little bit different. So where it's more of a horizontal tasting. So we have all cabinet wine except for one. So we have one sect, which is a sparkling German wine. This is badass wine. It's like a 36 months on the lees. It's like almost like a champagne style made from Riesling, essentially. So we got a bottle of sect and then 3 cabinet, all same ripeness level, just a touch of residual sugar, just all off dry, but one from Mosel, one from Rheinhessen, and one from Rheingau. So we're basically doing kind of like a regional differences between these 2 Rieslings, just kind of get a sense of what it is. Really cool stuff coming in. Besides, I mean, just want to drink some Riesling. So you guys are gonna have to drink some Riesling with me next month. Just really what it comes down to. What else? Wine prom is coming up, and I've been talking about it. More detailed email will probably go out later next week. But if you are planning on attending, just shoot me an RSVP. I'm still getting some RSVPs now. So just shoot me an RSVP and let me know. The tickets will go on sale pretty shortly. It's going to be the same kind of system we had last 2 years. So it's going to be time tiered. So the earlier you buy, the cheaper it is, longer you wait, the more expensive tickets will become. So just let me know if you're coming and just so that I can get an idea of how many people are coming. I think that's it. Any other questions before we get into the wine? About logistics and whatnot? Oh, and finally, this month, the feature organization we're donating to is the Hunger Project. So if you want to check out what they do and you want to donate alongside 64 Club, the link is right there in the shop box.
Right. If we accepted your Google invite for the wine prom, is that enough of an RSVP? Or I give you a verbal RSVP now because I'm gonna forget later.
Yes, I have the list up right now, so I'm just gonna add you right now as we speak. So Julia and Dan. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So in case you are all, for those of you who are just joining us now, we are tasting this guy today. 2010 Domaine Chante-Allouette-Cormeil Emillion Grand Cru is what we're tasting today with the little bird on the label. This has been kind of a bit of my secret weapon in my tool belt, so to speak, when I was on the restaurant floor for a long time. It's an incredible wine. And it's not every day you get a 14-year-old wine that you can pour, sometimes even at by the glass program. So yeah, this is a cool wine, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. But yeah, super excited. This is also the kind of Bordeaux that makes you realize that not all Bordeaux sucks. You know, this is kind of how the Bordeaux was made before it got shitty. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, so where are we? Let's start with a map. Come on, map. There you go. Map of France. All right. We are right here in Bordeaux. This is where we've been all month. Should look familiar. Really, we talked about the maritime influence of the Atlantic Ocean, the proximity to the ocean. These two rivers, the Dordogne River and the Garonne River, is essentially what kind of divides this region, as well as all this kind of humidity and moderating influence from these bodies of water is what makes viticulture here appealing or possible. And if you look more closely, this is what it looks like, right? Just some reviews real quick. Bordeaux does make every style of wine, sparkling, still, sweet, red, rosé, white, all those things. But really, when you're talking about Bordeaux varieties for the red, this is what we're talking about, right? Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Malbec. Cabernet Malbec are kind of going out of fashion, but the Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc, these top three are definitely still very, very significant players in terms of red. As far as white is concerned, which is where Entre-Deux-Mers, this is kind of a turquoise region between the two rivers. It's where the white wines come from, made from things down here. Yep, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel. These are the three noble varieties of white Bordeaux. Also, the sweet wines from Sauternes is right here. This is a yellow botrytis affected dessert wines we tasted. Comes from this yellow region by the river. And then the right bank. This is where same variety as a Medoc, but on the right bank is Merlot dominant. On the left bank is Medoc. Right? These are all the kind of things that we've talked about. These are some reviews. We talked about the 1855 classification, right? Napoleon ordered merchants of Bordeaux to basically classify the best producers into 5 different kind of growth system ahead of the 1855 World Expo. So he can showcase the best producers. And then at the time, the producers who made the most expensive wines essentially got categorized into first growth, second growth, third growth, and all of that. And we talked about how it's become this super rigid, never changing. It is just kind of like, can you even call it a living document? I guess it is because people still live by it or purchase. This plays a significant role in determining prices for all these wines and prestige of these wines. But it just never changes. It's not a dynamic list. That list from 1855, except for the promotion of Châteaubriand, that list has never changed. So people who are in the first growth in 1855 are still first growth producers. People who are in the fifth growth are still fifth growth producers. They have never been promoted. They've never been demoted. It's just like a set in stone kind of a thing. We talked about Sauternes briefly, botrytis affected here. So today, where we are is right here, Saint-Emilion, in the right bank. So because of that review, now you know, when I say right bank, you know that this wine is mostly Merlot. So this is a Merlot dominant blend of these Bordeaux varieties. Not that all of them has to go in there, but it's definitely going to have Merlot, mostly Merlot, probably followed by Cabernet Sauvignon and then some Cabernet Franc and other things. During the week, I was talking to somebody, I forget, probably it was one of my sales reps, but we were talking about Bordeaux, and then they asked a really geeky question and then kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I thought it was something that's worth kind of talking about. The question was, if you guys remember Burgundy, right? We talked about Napoleonic inheritance law in France. I mean, it's part of the reason why Burgundy is so fractured, Burgundy vineyards, right? So the whole idea is Napoleon came into power and, break up aristocracy and wealthy class. He basically put in place where if somebody dies and they have children, the land gets divided equally amongst those children. So let's say you own, 100 rows of vines in a vineyard, and you had 5 children, and when you die, each one of those children would inherit 20 rows essentially. And then when each one of those children dies, and if they had, let's say, 2 children, and each one of them will get 10 rows each. So it gets equally divided amongst your children. And imagine that happening upon generation. So when you go to Burgundy, it's not uncommon that you find producers who literally own like 2 rows of vineyards because it's just been fractured so many times over generations. And in a way, it is what the downside is it makes Burgundy really hard and confusing and very, very fractured, like we talked about. But it also makes it fun because so many different producers can come into the same vineyard and make the wine from that place. But you can see kind of a stylistic difference or different interpretation of each producer and what they do with that same plot of land. So there's something fun, and that's part of the reason why people get really geeky about Burgundy. It's the best way to basically talk about terroir and all of that. On the other hand, so the question was, why is it that in Bordeaux we have not seen that kind of fracturing, even though the Pleionic inheritance code applies true to everywhere in France? And I thought it was a really good question. So I did some digging. I never really quite thought about it that way. I thought it was just because people just bought it up, and it's partly true. I mean, big corporations and big these estates who have always been kind of wealthy, kind of just bought up everything they could get their hands on. But also the children themselves, it became a huge burden because unlike Burgundy, where the average size of vineyard holding, we're talking about probably like 10 to 15 hectares per producer. So very, very small land holdings by each producer. However, when you come to Medoc, especially the left bank, Grave and Medoc, we're talking about average vineyard holding size of probably anywhere between 80 to 120 hectares. So we're talking about gigantic estates. And turns out the inheritance tax in France can reach up to 50%. So imagine in a place like Bordeaux, very, very expensive real estate, and then you inherit because some estate can own 150 hectares, and you are one of the 2 children, and you inherit 75 hectares of these prized, one of the most expensive vineyard landholdings in France, and you have to pay half of that its value in tax. Most people just don't have the means to do it. So they end up selling those shares to other big conglomerates, investors. Quite frankly, this is how a lot of Chinese investors started coming into Bordeaux, just buying up these inherited lands that the children didn't want or couldn't buy or couldn't hold on to. So yeah, that's basically what happened here in Bordeaux. Just because how the land was held or the vineyards are held by these kind of large chateaus and estates rather than small vignerons and farmers and producers, it just became too burdensome for the heirs to hold up to those. And then it just became even more consolidated. And then these days, those first, second growth producers as well as foreign investment-backed estates basically own large chunks of Bordeaux, and that's why the trade structure looks that way. Anyways, very, very. I thought it was interesting doing some digging, so I figured I'll tell you that. All right, so let's talk about Saint-Emilion here in the east. By the way, if you ever go to Bordeaux and you go there for a trip or for a wine, I highly recommend that you base yourself out of the city of Saint-Emilion. Beautiful, beautiful place. Also really good restaurants. There's a really cool, really good restaurant scene down there, but it's just beautiful. I mean, talk about rolling hills of vineyard just even outside of just the city, cobblestone streets. I mean, all the things you think about when you think about like old chateau, medieval Romanesque, cathedrals and things like that. Basically, Saint-Emilion has all of that. So I highly recommend that you guys base yourself out of here before you shoot out into the different parts. It's also UNESCO heritage site. So check it out. So what is the difference, you may be wondering? You don't really see anything for Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, even though this one is a Saint-Emilion Grand Cru appellation. Saint-Emilion is just this right here. So what is the difference between Saint-Emilion and Saint-Emilion Grand Cru? And wait to be confused, because this is very confusing, is part of the reason why people talk a lot of shit on Saint-Emilion the appellation system, the Grand Cru system particularly. But there's also, you decide for yourself whether this is a good thing or not. In my opinion, it has its drawbacks and fallbacks, obviously, but I think Chante-Allouette-Cormeil has one of the better classification system, unlike the 1855 classification system, where it's just like a old set in stone kind of a thing that never moves. Their classification is much more dynamic and much more based on meritocracy, if you ask me. And we'll get into that in a second. So Chante-Allouette appellation, this line is basically what you see. Right bank, so it means everything is based on Merlot. The soil type here changes to more clay, which is much better for early ripening Merlot. So that's why you see a lot more Merlot in the right bank as opposed to gravelly and the limestone backed left bank, which is much more better suited for Cabernet Sauvignon. So Chante-Allouette Grand Cru, by the way, if you are ever wondering, the movie Sideways, we've made reference to this movie quite a few times. At the very end, when Paul Giamatti's character is drinking a glass of Chateau Cheval Blanc, right, in that little plastic cup, burger, eating a cheeseburger, that is actually Merlot dominant Bordeaux. That is actually a Chante-Allouette producer, Chante-Allouette Grand Cru producer. So it's probably the most well-known, most recognized Chante-Allouette Grand Cru producer. But just know that movie, if you ever watch it again, it comes from this region where we're having this wine today. Chante-Allouette and Chante-Allouette Grand Cru both are only red wine, only appellations in all of Bordeaux. So everywhere else, you get white wine or sweet wine only, like Sauternes sweet wine only and all of that. But many places usually, if you do red, they usually will allow to do rosé as well. But here you can only make, so anytime you say Chante-Allouette on the label as an appellation, it has to be red. So if you ever come across a white bottle and it says Chante-Allouette on the label, it's either a fake or something happened, or some sort of mistake happened. So it's not supposed to. So Chante-Allouette Grand Cru has to be estate bottle. So this one is Chante-Allouette Grand Cru appellation. So which means the fruit, the vineyard has to be farmed by the people who make the wine. You hear that term quite a bit, estate bottle, estate owned, is it an estate fruit? That's exactly what it means, that they have a control over the farming as well as the vinification. Oftentimes negociants and people in the middle that will buy grapes from other people, or they may even buy finished wine from other people and they blend it and mature it themselves and label it differently and sell it off. But in this case, when you say estate, it has to be grown and made by the same person. So Chante-Allouette Grand Cru has to be estate bottle. Of course, compared to Chante-Allouette, it has a lower maximum yield. It's a longer élevage requirement. Élevage is just a French word for treatment, like aging, maturation of the wine. So whether it be putting in the oak, putting in cement, how long you have to age it for, all those things, all that process is called élevage. Basically, whatever takes place after the fermentation is over. There's a longer élevage requirement as well as a lower maximum yield requirement for Grand Cru. But essentially, the only difference between Chante-Allouette and Chante-Allouette Grand Cru appellation is that Grand Cru people, the Grand Cru appellation, are the producers who use estate fruit. So there's not really, again, some restrictions, some regulations that are put on there, but not a whole lot of difference there. But this is where it gets really confusing. These two share the exact same boundaries. So as you see, the Chante-Allouette, you can either from here, another producer can name their Chante-Allouette Grand Cru. Some can label it just Chante-Allouette appellation. It all depends on whether you're a estate producer or not. But oftentimes the Grand Cru producers get away from the riverbank. As you go up towards Pomerol and then go more north or east, there's actually hills that running through here. So a lot of Grand Cru producers tend to be away from the river, up on the hillside, where there's more limestone rather than clay on the bottom. But that's usually the case. But again, it really depends on whether the fruit is estate, the source of the fruit is estate fruit or not. That's really the big distinction. So now, Aside from the appellation, Saint-Emilion also has its own classification system, just like the 1855 classification system of Medoc, Grave, and Sauterne. So this Grand Cru classification system, just like the one in Medoc, it has a wait, hold on. It's divided into three different things. So Saint-Emilion Premier Grand Cru Classe, which are further divided into Premier Grand Cru Classe A, Premier Grand Cru Classe B, and then they also have regular Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, and that was all made possible. That all passed in 1954. What happened in 1984 was that Grand Cru Classe and the Premier Grand Cru Classe were eliminated as appellations because they decided that they didn't live up to the kind of the EU regulations of what they defined as an appellation. There was not enough distinction between these two. So they eliminated the appellation system. So from 1954 to 1984, there were actually 4 separate appellations in Saint-Emilion. So Saint-Emilion, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, and then Saint-Emilion Premier Grand Cru, and Saint-Emilion Grand Cru as well. But all of that was eliminated, and today there are only 2, which is Saint-Emilion Grand Cru and Saint-Emilion. The reason I say that, I know that's very confusing, because especially if you go into the older vintages, prior to 1984, which is still around on the market, you may still see these appellations on the Saint-Emilion bottle. And you may think to yourself, I'm like, wait, these things don't exist anymore. How is it possible that these things are on the label? It's because the 2 of the classification system that happened to be appellation, used to be appellation, were actually removed in 1984. So 1984 is a big distinction. If you ever get into Bordeaux, especially Saint-Emilion, and then you see wines prior to 1984, and then you see labels like Saint-Emilion Premier Grand Cru, that's a pretty rare thing because those things don't exist anymore. In case if you ever want to get into a, I don't know, auction or a collecting, Saint-Emilion, now you know. 1984. Just remember 1984 classification system of Saint-Emilion. It's a big year, so whether you collect before that or after that. But let's talk about Saint-Emilion classification system for a second. So Saint-Emilion was snubbed out of that 1855 classification because this region just wasn't that popular at the time. In 1855, it was all about Sauterne, it was all about Medoc, some Grave producers thrown in there, but really we're talking about Medoc and Sauterne, right? So Saint-Emilion wasn't on the map, but then later on it became much more popular through the producers like Woong, talked about Ben Sideways. So exactly 100 years later, a century later, the winemakers of Saint-Emilion got together and they decided to come out with their own classification. Said, fuck you, left bank, you left us out. So we're going to come up with a better, grander, basically classification system. So that's what they created in 1954, the 3 new appellations. So Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classe, Saint-Emilion Premier Grand Cru Classe. And then, like I mentioned, the last two were eliminated in 1984. The difference between the 1855 classification and the Saint-Emilion classification is that in Saint-Emilion classification, the revisions are intended every 10 years. So depending on how well they've done in those 10 years, either the producer, the estate can be promoted to a better class, or it could be demoted down to a worse class, which is not the case with the Medoc's 1855 classification. Once you're in there, you're just stuck in there forever. So, in my opinion, that kind of gets all these estates to push the boundaries and make sure they continually strive for quality. It's really meritocracy based, if you have, like I said. But in order for the wines to be considered for this classification every 10 years, each state is required to submit wines to the Saint-Emilion Wine Council, which is basically a group of all the Saint-Emilion wine producers. So it's basically the peers who get to decide whether they belong to a higher class, lower class, and all of that. So it's very much, if you ask me, a very fair system every 10 years. It's not some judging body or whatnot, but it's the people who all make wine in Saint-Emilion decide amongst themselves who is really doing well, who is not, all of that, which I really like. But the first list of Premier Grand Cru Classe divided into A and B tiers, A being better, B being second tier. And the Grand Cru Classe and Grand Cru were all established, completed in 1955. They were legally enacted in 1958, and then updates, those revisions that I was telling you about, took place in 1969, 1986, 1996, 2006, 2012. So again, if you ever go into collecting Saint-Emilion, these 5 revision periods played some role within, who was demoted, who was promoted, and all of that. So just naming that, just putting it on your radar. So, I know all of this is not going to stick in your brain, but later on, moving down your wine journey, at some point you're sitting around a Bordeaux dinner and people are talking about these different revisions that took place. Now you know what I'm talking about. The 2006 revision was a big one. So it kind of jeopardized the entire integrity of the system, the whole classification system of Saint-Emilion, because the people who were in a higher class got demoted and decided to sue the wine council that demoted them. So it was tied up in the French court system. They actually took it all the way through. It wasn't just trying to figure it out amongst themselves. And in 2009, they finally compromised and said the states that were promoted in 2006 will stay in the promoted status, but all the people who were demoted were rendered invalid. That demotion was rendered invalid, and they got moved back up to the original promotion class that they were already in. So there was a lot of talk at the time about how, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru class, it doesn't mean anything. It's basically now you can just sue, and you're not happy with the results of the election, you can just sue and then fight your way back in. So a lot of just bureaucracy and politics. And I kind of chuckle, especially in the current political landscape that we're living in, where someone can deny the results of the election and sue and try to fight their way back in. It's basically what happened to Saint-Emilion, and they succeeded. And ever since then, they're like, oh, this Saint-Emilion classification system is kind of bullshit. But in order to maintain their kind of unique means of quality control, as well as to avoid the future legal problems. So Saint-Emilion, the wine council, those vineyards, did decide to do something that was unthinkable at the time, which is, they kept it really within themselves to have this classification system. They decided to completely give up authority of ranking their own wines and gave that over to INAO, which is the French appellation deciding body, the panel. So in 2012, the classification and all the process were given over to them. They actually created a legitimate appeals process for anybody who was not happy with their demoted estates. The current classification, published in 2022, was entirely conducted by the INAO. So Saint-Emilion producers had nothing to do with the classifying those wines anymore. And then they had, set principles that they use, like soil analysis, topography, viticultural analysis, winemaking technique, reputation, tasting, spanning a decade of vintages. So it's a quite of extensive testing that they go through. But again, starting from 2022, it's not the Saint-Emilion that themselves that rate the wines that come out of there. So the current list from the 2022 has 2 Premier Grand Cru Classe A, which is Chateau Pavie, and you might have heard these guys' names. They're very, very sought after on the market. Chateau Pavie, and then there's a newcomer, Chateau Figeac. Those 2 producers are the only 2 Premier Grand Cru Classe A producers, and there are 12 Premier Grand Cru Classe B producers, and then there's a 71 Grand Cru Classe A properties altogether. And just like 2006 and 2012, of course, 2022, the classification was not without controversy. The 4 formerly top-ranked chateaus decided to actually withdraw from classification, which one of them was actually Cheval Blanc that I mentioned. So Cheval Blanc, Angers, Auxonne, La Gaffelière, they all withdrew, saying we don't want to be part of this classification system anymore. once again, giving a lot of blow to the legitimacy or possibly the future integrity of the Saint-Emilion classification system. But the problem was a lot of that wasn't necessarily that they didn't agree with the process of it. But here's another thing that possibly makes the MEDOC classification, in my opinion, not so legitimate, because the fact that you can get in there and you can never be promoted or you can never be demoted doesn't make any sense to me. But on top of that, the MEDOC producers, when they buy up other vineyards, no matter where they buy it, and that's not to say they're buying up shitty vineyards, but no matter where they buy it, it just gets absorbed by the estate, and then they instantly, that new vineyard that they buy instantly becomes a first growth or whatever the growth system they're in. So if they were first growth producer, and then let's say they bought vineyards from a second growth producer, that vineyard from the second growth producer immediately becomes a first growth vineyard. It's just the way MEDOC system is. They're looking at it from the lens of those esteemed producers that they know what they're doing, and they're buying these vineyards, and then they're making into great wines and doing all of that. So it becomes all of it. It becomes a first growth properties, and it's not like that in Saint-Emilion. So, for example, the Chateau Pavie bought some vineyards in early 2020, and then only 27 of the 29 hectares that they bought is currently ranked as a Premier Grand Class A, and the other one is ranked as a Premier Grand Cru Class B. So if they were to, were to make the wines from those last 2 hectares that were classified as a Class B, and then blend it with the fruit from vineyards that are classified as a Grand Cru Class A, they can only call it, even the majority may come from Grand Cru Class A, they can only call it Grand Cru Class B. And then they were not happy with that. So all of that, so they essentially would decide to withdraw from the classification altogether. But once again, to me, if you ask me, that's what makes Saint-Emilion classification system more fair. To me, that makes much more sense. Maybe divide it into different classification, but obviously this whole new system did not satisfy everybody's needs and wants. And in the midst of all the legal challenges, they still maintain the classification system is dependent on the brand and the reputation rather than the vineyard and the wine themselves. One of the things that there's a lot of talk about that needs to change in Saint-Emilion classification system is that currently for the wines to be ranked or to be considered, it needs to be sold on this Bordeaux, basically a marketplace that exists, the merchants marketplace through negociant. So in order to gain the visibility essentially necessary to be classified. So they're basically saying you have to kind of pay, and these negociant, there's a lot of room for corruption and paying off these negociants to sell certain people's wines and put more exposure and visibility. So it's not a really classification that's dependent upon the actual quality of the wine, but more for how well somebody markets their wines. Nonetheless, I know there was a lot of conversation that I just said a lot of things about Saint-Emilion, and it may not be very interesting to you, but I just want to give you that information because surely if you ever go to Bordeaux dinner and you're drinking Saint-Emilion and you're drinking a left Bordeaux, there will be some conversation about classification system. Because again, these Bordeaux people, this is their favorite fucking pastime. This is what they like to talk about. So now you're equipped with some background on why people should talk shit on Saint-Emilion, but you can say, hey, but to me, it's a lot more based on meritocracy. It's revised every 10 years, as opposed to something that's just set in stone and never changes. So now you can sound like you know a thing or two about Bordeaux because you do. All right. Sorry, that was a long hustle about or talk about Saint-Emilion classification system, but I don't know. I was doing some research earlier and then I just got deep into the rabbit hole. And yeah, it was a good review for me too. I had to study all this back then, but I forgot about it. All right, so who makes this wine? Let's bring it all back to the wine. It's these people. This is cute. dad-daughter combo here. The Domaine Chante-Allouette-Cormeil that's owned by the Delal family. The gentleman on the left is Yves. Lady on the right is Samuel. Yves Delal and Samuel Delal. They are the current generations that are running the property. They own two properties, so they're right next to each other essentially. But Chateau Guirosse, Gueyrosse. Any of you who speak French better than me, if the pronunciation is off, let me know. They've owned that property since 1862. This property, Chante-Allouette-Cormeil, is older, so they've owned it since 1818. This is a bigger property too. This is 11 hectares. The other properties are 4 hectares, so a total of 15 hectares. Again, very, very small producer here, just family owned since 1818. Since 1995, the wines have been made by Samuel. So Yves handed over winemaking to his daughter. And that's basically who is making this wine. Let's see, where's the... This is their vineyard. They're certified bee friendly, by the way. If you go to their website, it's all over their website. They're very proud of the fact that they're bee friendly. I've said this a long time, many times, but if you're ever wondering if the property is organic or not, if they actually spray pesticides or not, always look at the ground. I mean, look at how much is covered. There's no clear ground. Things like this tells you there's no substance or no chemicals being sprayed. If the land strip beneath the vines is barren or naked, you can be sure that it's sprayed with something. There's another shot of the vineyard. But yeah, they have been farming organically since the very beginning. So no chemicals have ever been sprayed on these fields since 1818. And they never really cared about being certified, but I don't know, maybe just celebrating 200 years of organic farming, they decided to apply for certification. So in 2018, they actually became certified organic. And then later on, they also became certified bee friendly, like I mentioned. Their winemaking has always been very traditional, meaning very non-interventionist. They've been making the wine the quote unquote kind of the old way. This is a way the wine used to be made in Bordeaux for so long. It's actually becoming kind of new again. What I mean by that is that Bordeaux kind of went through this stylistic change, just like almost everywhere else in the world, but notably places like Napa, which is, you can argue that it's a new world place that's trying to copy the styles of Bordeaux. What I mean by this stylistic change is that basically, quote unquote, the more and bigger became fashionable. More oak, more tannin, more alcohol, more extraction, bigger body. All of that just became kind of the name of the game. And it's the same reason why I don't really care for Napa Cab. It's the same reason I didn't really care for Bordeaux for the longest time. But people like them, the Delal family, who has been making the wine the same way for the last 200 plus years, they've been stuck to that for so long and never, and even last week's wine, the Chateau Le Puy, their Duc de Nov wine, like those are the same people. They also never changed their winemaking ever. They never gave concession to this kind of new style of winemaking that was becoming popular all around the world. These people have been doing it for so long, they stuck to it so long that it is actually now coming back and it's becoming new again. So this style of Bordeaux is very unusual. This kind of, I mean, when I taste this wine, what I taste is restraint. And it's kind of what I respect about them. Oftentimes, as we've talked about this month, this is where you're going to see shit ton of new oak. You're going to see a lot of really elevated alcohol percentage. You're going to see really deep, dark, just super extracted, rip your face out tannin, just everything becomes really big. But the old Bordeaux with neutral barrels, no new oak, if there's any, very small amount, fruits picked earlier, balance between kind of that herbaceous, savory component of the wine versus the fruit, all of that, much more lively acid, all of that was what it used to be. So this reminds me what why Bordeaux once probably was a greatest or the most traded wines in the world. But you know, they're thanks to people like Delol and the Puy from last week that we are able to kind of taste the history, so to speak. On top of that, what I particularly love these guys, what they do, and this is why this has always been kind of my hidden arsenal, because not every restaurant, in fact, majority of restaurants don't have the budget or the space to cellar their wines for a long time. But these guys hold on to their wines and they cellar it until they believe it is ready for consumption. So this 2010 vintage was just released in 2023. So just last year, they basically decided that 2010 vintage was ready to go, and they released it in 2023. So they cellared it for 13 years before releasing this wine. And that kind of level of conviction, so to speak, or I mean, obviously they've been making wines since 200 plus years, so they kind of have the not only the reserve wines, but also they've been doing it for so long that they own the land. They can afford to do so. I understand that, but nonetheless, it's rare that you come across producers that cellar their wines as long as they do. So pretty lucky. It's definitely a treat that we get to have access to wines like this. So what is this wine? This is 65% Merlot, 20% Cabernet Franc, 15% Cabernet Sauvignon, grown on iron-rich sandstone soil. As we mentioned, right bank, so mostly Merlot, 65% Merlot, right? Checks out. Average age of the vine is 40 years old, all organic, like I said. Spontaneous fermentation, meaning there's no added yeast, only the yeast that's found on the skins of the grapes. Macerated between 3 to 5 weeks. All hand harvested, obviously. It's all pressed in a traditional basket press from 1940s. And then aged for 24 months in neutral barrels, which are all at least 2 years old. Again, pretty rare thing these days. This is how Bordeaux used to be, but pretty rare thing these days because a new oak has become the name of the game. So they use neutral barrels, at least 2 years old, 2 to 3 years old. They rack the wine, which means they let the wine settle in that barrel for 24 months, take the clarified portion off the top, siphoned out. So no need for filtering. So no filtering, no fining, just a touch of sulfites at bottling. And that's basically what this is. So this has been in barrel for 24 months. And then that was 13 years ago. So for 11 years, this has been bottle aged in their cellar, is basically what we're tasting today. Okay, that was a lot of talking. Sorry, that Santelmian classification system took a lot. I didn't think it was going to take that long, but it did. All right. Any questions before we get into tasting? By the way, if you just opened this wine, I hope you guys decanted or have decanted it. This wine changes quite a bit for some time. It really opens up. Even just in my classes, opened up quite a bit. All right, let's taste it. Who wants to take the appearance? Come on, people. It's not every day we taste 14-year-old wine.
We'll do it. Why not?
Excellent.
All right. Where are we at?
It's very dark in here.
It's dark. Hold on, let me turn the light on. Give them one light.
Also, did anybody's a cork disintegrate? Mine did not, but I was surprised. I thought it was going to be much more brittle. I thought
Yes.
to get it on. Yeah. Okay.
Ours is pretty good. So, clarity. What's that?
No, I'd say this is not clear. Cannot see anything.
Well, no, it's not, but it's not hazy. It's clear.
Yeah, this wine is still clear. I mean, you can tell it's not a filter wine, but yeah, I would still call this a clear wine. but you're also, Margo, you're also right, which is that the color is deep. You can't really see through anything, right?
It's very deep. Very, very deep purple. Color, red. Very
I mean,
red. And so I'd
no,
probably say, I'd
color,
say ruby, ruby, maybe even darker than
I'd
that,
say, I'd
actually.
say more like garnet.
Garnet, yeah.
yeah, exactly. There's some brown coming in here, right? You can tell that the
I think
color.
tawny was even almost verging on, like, even a little tawny, even maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely it's noticeable amount of brown, and also I want you to guys. If the lighting is terrible, it may be hard to see.
No,
but
we
if
turned on
you if you tilt it over at 45 degrees and you look at the core and then you look at towards the rim, there's a bit of a color variation that happens, like the very core of the line versus the outer edge, and also the that's what they call meniscus, the basically very outer edge of the wine. There's a kind of like a watery meniscus, like a ring that runs
Yeah.
around,
Yep.
right? So that's usually a sign that wine has seen some age and a lot of like that color pigmentation, the anthocyanin, if you want to get geeky about it, is starting to precipitate out into the wine. That's the kind of that when you start to see that watery meniscus and rim on the. So
I
yeah,
feel
oh
like
no,
that's something that could get you to just stare into a glass of wine for a really long time.
Yeah.
Trying to decide if it's a wine or if you've had too much and it's like starting to.
yeah, exactly. But all right, cool. Any other observations? So that's all of that?
Not talking about legs.
Yep.
No,
Um,
can't really see deposits because it's pretty dark.
can't
but
see anything.
From what I
Yeah.
can, what I
Doesn't
can
look like
see,
it.
I don't see any.
But I'm glad you mentioned that. So especially with the older wines, especially if it hasn't been decanted or it hasn't been standing up for some time, so all the kind of deposit to kind of settle to the bottom, it's not uncommon that you will sometimes see some deposits floating around. My bottle's been standing up for days, so it's fine. But if your bottle was laying down on the side and you just popped it up today and then popped it open, it is possible that you may notice some deposits floating around in your wine. It's very natural, especially with the older wines. It's exactly what happens. So
And we did decant ours.
We did decant. Yeah.
So
okay, cool. Excellent. You get to pick the next person for the nose.
Should we be mean? No. What do you want to do?
Can I volunteer? I want to do nose.
All right.
There you
yeah,
go.
go for it.
There we go.
Always love volunteers.
I also let me get some more. I also did not decant it, so we'll see. Sorry, let me pour a little bit more. Didn't decant it, opened it like an hour plus ago.
Okay.
All right. This wine is clean.
Clean. Just want to sell.
I call it a medium plus. Like I can start smelling pretty well off of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty expressive off the glass. I'm gonna call this medium plus as well. Medium plus intense aromas of what do you got?
I get some floral like rose and violet, those purple flowers.
Yeah, I did too, but like I don't necessarily get like fresh. I get like dried,
Dried.
like
Yeah.
dried violet petals.
Yeah.
Dry rose petals, things like that. Yeah, for sure.
Mostly black fruit with some red fruit.
Yeah, definitely mostly black. I mean, this is to me just like Merlot just pops out everywhere, right? Like to
Yeah.
me, the plumminess is everywhere on this thing. But plum, the black cherry, all of that. But some like red cherry as well. I got some of that as well.
Mm-hmm. And some red plum.
Yeah, definitely some red plum as well. But yeah, definitely just full of mostly black fruit with a sprinkle of red fruit on top. Yeah. Nature of the fruit.
I would say there's some jamminess to it.
Is it jammy or is it pruny?
Pruny. Maybe it's
Right?
pruny.
Yeah, there's definitely some raisin nature to this fruit, right? I mean,
Mhm.
still some fresh fruit on here still too.
Yeah.
And that's the fucking crazy part about their wines. It's 14 years old, yet it's still spitting off a lot of fresh fruit. Yes, the nature of the fruit has definitely raisin quite a bit, but still, I still get some like fresh fruit here. It's not just
Yeah, like the plum especially, I think is just kind of fruit.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Kind of fresh. Yeah.
Yeah, fresh plums, but like dried cherries, like yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um any herbaceous herbal?
Maybe a little,
Yeah.
maybe a little
Yeah.
green bell
Yep.
pepper.
Definitely. I mean, we talked about the second biggest blend in this thing is 20% Cabernet Franc. So Cabernet Franc definitely has a lot of pyrazine. I mean, Bordeaux does too. Cabernet Sauvignon does too. So there's definitely some green, and green thing you're always going to smell in Bordeaux. It's just like a thing that you smell in Bordeaux. But there's definitely some like savory green thing going on here for sure.
Yeah. I do also get herbal, maybe like fennel.
Yeah, some like a little fennel, little like even eucalyptus, menthol kind of thing. But yeah, fennel, I think is a good call for sure. There's something savory for sure. Like
Yeah.
on top of all this black fruit and a red fruit, there's definitely and dried rose petals and dried fruit flowers. There's definitely some herbaceous kind of herbal thing going on here.
Yeah.
Spice, any
Maybe,
stuff?
yeah, maybe white pepper and maybe whetstone.
Okay.
White pepper and whetstone. Both
Yeah.
of those.
Exactly. Definitely some stone pepperiness here. Definitely some like to me, this is like a I don't know if you ever drive on a like a gravelly road and it has just rained. To me,
Like today.
Yeah, kind of like today. Yeah, yeah. So kind of like a whetstone kind of thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, see what you're missing in DC, Liz? Rainy spring. Crazy pollen.
All right. Secondary.
This part I'm pretty bad at. Definitely not yeast, not milk, maybe, and like I know you said it's newer oak barrels. So maybe some like I don't know. I don't really smell it. I mean, I would expect to, but I don't really. Maybe cloves. Not really.
Yeah, I get a little bit of like I don't get vanilla, but like maybe
Nothing.
some cloves, maybe, or some of these like dark things, maybe like a cocoa nibs and like some coffee kind of a thing, just a touch of it, not a whole lot. Again, this is very neutral. Yeah, very little neutral oak. It's not much of it, but I definitely get.
But
like,
I do get the tertiary. Like I get like the leather.
Exactly. Now we're really
leather,
talking
tobacco.
Yeah. We haven't had a wine that where we got to talk about these tertiary in a while, but here we are finally, the 14-year-old wines. We can talk about tertiary. But now this is what we mean when the wine smells like leather, right? Like tobacco, even vegetal. Like this is all there, savory. Like this is all there. And this is exactly what happens with wine as it gets some bottle aging, right? All that fruit. You know, we've talked so much about because mostly we taste very fresh young wines. You know, we talked about give it 5-10 years. It starts turning into tertiaries, and this is why you lay down the wine. This is what happens to the wine. All that fresh fruit and primary turns into pruned, raisin, and then some of that turns into these kind of leather, tobacco. Like I get a ton of tobacco on this thing.
Yeah.
You know, all of that, and this is what happens to the wine. So as you age this even longer, the primary fruit that we're talking about is going to continue to develop the tertiary. And at some point, when it gets past that peak, the apex of the aging curve, you're going to start losing all the freshness and everything kind of turns into tertiary. And then now you've gone too far because the whole point of all of that was to really increase complexity.
Yeah.
Right. But if you start losing all the primary, it's actually wine starts becoming simpler. And then also you're losing all the freshness. So you want some freshness. Like who wants to drink this fucking old dead ass wine, you know? So
yeah.
But yes, totally. Ton of tertiary popping off here for sure. This kind of fig, prune, dry things as well. Yeah, just a tobacco, leather. I think these are all great calls.
Yeah.
Excellent.
This got a lot going on. This is a good one.
It's got a lot going on. It's a very complex one. Yeah. All right. You get to pick the next person for the palette.
Heidi? I saw you taking a picture of the bottle. You're ready. All right, thanks, soon.
I was actually admiring the bottle because you can see in mine where it was like laid on its side. Can you see that? Where the
Yeah.
thing? Anyway.
Oh yeah, you see it on mine too. Yeah. All right.
All right. Mine has not been open very long. I did not decant, so we'll see how we feel. Definitely dry. Yes, it is. Medium plus. It's not, it's like right in the middle there.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think it's like super streamy. I'll call this
Yeah.
about medium, high end of medium, or in the medium plus, but
Yeah.
I think I would end up on medium as well.
The tannin is there.
It's there, but it's really well integrated, right? Like, yeah, talk about like the nature, like of the tannin, and
The tannin
like,
is, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like you're not chewing anything, like it's really not, but it's very, I don't know how to explain it. Like, have you ever been in a dusty room with like super, super fine dust? It's like,
Mhm.
that's what's in my mouth.
yeah,
Just coating it. But I'm sure that like, if my bottle was open longer, decanted longer, it would be a little less noticeable.
yeah. I would call this about medium as well on the tannin. I don't think it's like ripping right now, but like, it's definitely there. Like lower end of medium, higher end of medium minus is basically what I'm seeing right now. But what I'm really impressed by is actually the nature of the tannin. Not only the fine grain, because we talk about that a lot, like chewy, rustic, tannin versus a fine grain, but it's just so well integrated into the wine. Like it doesn't feel like just like a separate, distinctive character of the wine. It just kind of is part of the wine. It's kind of like a melded into the wine, as opposed to like standing on its own and firmly just kind of holding everything up. Again, I know
It's
that's a
not
very
blocking
kind of
the flavor.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
purely sensation. It's not hurting your access to the flavors.
Yeah, I know it's
Or
very
the-
much of like a qualitative analysis I'm giving on that thing. Obviously, there's no quantitative way of saying that, but like there's certain wines that especially young tannic wines where the tannin just feels so not out of place because out of balance, but just so on its own. It's like it just like it isolated a component. It's just not well melded with the
Right,
rest.
right, right.
And then with this wine is that time. It's like a
minute to find it. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a gumbo. It's like all the flavor, anything that has cooked slow and low for a long time, it's just like all the flavor has just kind of melded and because of a thing of its own. Like this is
I'm
what's
quoting you on that on
yeah.
Instagram. Call the Saint Emillion a gumbo.
Yeah.
um,
With a single sweep, I've managed to piss off the South and the French people at the same
well
time.
done. The
Great.
Cajun folks.
Yeah, the Cajun and the French. I pissed them off all at the same time.
Or they'll be happy. We don't know.
Alcohol.
Alcohol. Medium. I mean, it's not again, it's a very like round wine, so I'm not feeling hot on it.
Yeah, I think it's like 13.5. It's got some booze though. 14. Okay. I mean, to me, it doesn't feel like 14.
It doesn't drink like it.
Yeah, doesn't drink like 14. I would call like 13.5 at the most. 13.5 is what I would guess, but yeah, 14.
Depends on how much you have.
Depends on how much, or it depends on how much bourbon you
Are
have
you
drank.
speaking from experience?
Yeah.
What
Uh,
is, remind me what's considered high, like 15 and 16?
yeah, 15 and above, essentially. Yeah.
Napa.
So medium plus is like
Napa
14,
gas.
14.5. Yeah. So,
The body, it's medium plus to full, I think. I mean, it's given lots.
Yeah, I'll probably land on a medium plus on this thing. Not
Mhm.
like super full, but like, yeah, lower end of medium plus. But yeah, definitely some body. It's got some, I mean, between the alcohol, the tannin, all of that, it's definitely got some body to it. Some weight.
No moose, flavor intensity. I would give it pronounced. It's giving lots of different, I mean, I get each sip I'm kind of isolating different things. But they're there.
Okay. For me, I think I'll end on medium plus, but definitely like this is definitely on a higher end of it. Like it's expressive. This one is expressive.
Yeah.
It's not like you're digging for flavor. It's like it's all in there.
Mhm.
All right. And then do you confirm everything that Sarah picked out? Anything new? Anything different?
Yeah, I do. I would say I'm definitely leaning into the secondary and tertiary levels more than the fruit. I definitely got the fruit on the nose,
Mhm.
but on the palate,
Oh, this wine is changing by the minute. Like each glass, it's different.
I've got more black fruit, cooked fruit.
Mhm.
I'm not getting much herbaceousness.
Yeah, to me, earlier we're talking about it's kind of green, but really this herbaceousness or the savoriness is more this. It's like tobacco leaves, like
Yeah,
leather.
I'm getting smoke, tobacco, leather,
Yeah,
full on in that camp.
yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of figgy,
Mm-hmm.
like between the dried and the cooked fruits,
Yep. Totally.
like a cobbler.
Yeah, I guess some tar as well. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's on the palate, I also pick up some phenolic bitterness, which is
Mhm.
probably, any wine that has had a decent amount of elevated level of tannin is going to have some level of bitterness. Um, but yeah, so definitely pick up some of that. I don't think it's necessarily out of balance, but
Yeah.
I definitely notice it.
Let me see.
Yeah. So you're saying you get all the primary, but really on the palate, even more so than on the nose, you're picking up a lot of the kind of secondary and tertiary thing, dry fruit and
Yeah, the fruit's not gone. The fruit's
Yeah.
not gone. I think it's drinking pretty nicely, but it's turning to the tertiary pretty hard,
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah,
quick. So it's if I were to wait 2 years, I'd be worried that 2 to 5 years, I'd worry that it would be a
tertiary,
little
yeah.
too heavy into the tertiary and you'd lose some of that happiness.
Yeah.
The primary.
Cool, cool. Length?
Hmm. I'd say medium plus.
This is the only thing that I thought that this was noticeably weak on. Not necessarily weak, but like the finish, the flavors, I thought while complex and a lot of different things going on, it just doesn't stick around all that long. To
Yeah.
me, this is like high end of medium, lower end of medium plus.
Yeah.
I think I would end on medium, but yeah, medium plus, somewhere out there. It's definitely not short, but it's I want
it
it
is
to be long.
surprising that it's not living a little longer for how pronounced it is.
Mhm. Exactly. Okay, take it on for us. How good is it? Would you age it?
I would say very good overall. Between good and very good. And I personally would not give it much more. I like more fruit. I like the counterbalance with the smoke and the tar and the leather.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna give the best sip, but teach their own.
Yeah. Balanced complexity wise, I think this we call out
It's
all
great.
kinds, right? Medium plus to very complex. So it's up there. Lengthwise, sorry, concentration wise, we call it medium plus on the nose, medium plus on the palate. So concentrated. Length, we call it medium. So if you kind of take average of all of that, we're landing on somewhere between medium plus higher end of medium plus. So I mean around medium plus. So it's like I was saying pronounced medium plus medium. So to me, this is a very good one. I agree with that call. And I am also will agree with your aging call. I think this wine is at the apex of its evolution. This is kind of like why you age the wine, and this is what you want to catch. Like this is what I want to taste on a wine, where you get the primary, but you also get the tertiary. I ideally I want like equal amount, and I would say this is kind of like where that is right now. Any one way, any longer, like you're gonna get more tertiary, and then you're gonna start losing the primary. Obviously, that also depends on one's preference. If you really like wines that are in this tertiary categories, by all means, age it longer. But to me, when I really find wines that are just beautifully aged and singing in this kind of a aging curve, is when I get both the primary and the equal amount, as subjective and qualitative that is, equal amount of primary and tertiary spitting out. And I think this wine is exactly that way.
Yeah.
If you want to give it another maybe year or two, just to see how much primary you lose and move to tertiary, maybe. But even then, to me, I mean, this is why these guys held on to this wine and just released this last year. Like to them, this is a prime drinking window. So, and I agree with that call. I think this is like right there right now. So, so you don't have to age it, and then you can just pop it open and enjoy it.
Sometimes I think of the calculus with some of these wines that are a little more high value.
Yeah.
About like what the best strategy would be to kind of test out aging, because it's like, well, if you only buy the one bottle, you're sort of guessing on when is the best time to open it versus buying like 3 bottles or 6 bottles.
Yeah.
You can really test over time where its prime is.
Totally.
But that's, just my nerdy brain.
No,
But
totally. I think if I'm buying any wines with what I think is that I want to age, I'm usually buying anywhere between like 4 and 6 bottles.
Right.
If not more, but depending on the price, obviously. But 4 to 6 bottles, and then, obviously more bottles number you get, more frequently you can test things out, right? Like I can do a 3-year versus 4-year, as opposed to if I only got 3 bottles, I may do 3 years versus 6 or 5. So. But here you go, folks. We finally got to taste some old wine together. Want to give you some tertiary flavors and aromas, and this is what happens. Any questions?
Here's my
I have
question.
a question.
Sorry, go ahead, Allison, please.
No, you go first.
Okay. So, this is definitely the oldest wine we've had, right? When did people start interfering with wine so that it would be something you could age longer, right? I mean, you see these vintages that have been around, since the 30s and the 40s, probably even earlier. We didn't go through all of Marty's collection, but I'm sure he has something that's older than that.
Also, Marty is on the
Given
phone.
this is, well, I know, but given this is a natural wine with nothing added to it, does that mean that this is the max on a natural wine, or are we talking about,
You mean like 12 years?
a certain point in like 72 or 75 or 76 when people really started trying to figure out what chemicals they add to their wine that are going to make it better over time? The history of this is kind of confusing.
So I wouldn't say natural wine is necessarily, because the wines that were made in the 20s and 30s, I mean, they're all natural wines. Basically what we define as natural wines, right? And those are still this kind of a heavy manipulation and all of that didn't start taking place until like the 70s, is when it really started taking off. A lot of chemical farming, a lot of just using new school idea of winemaking, which is it's like a factory making, right? Everything is predictable. You're sterilizing everything. So in the name of predictability and control. But that doesn't really happen in the 70s. But all these wines from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s, we're talking about natural wine producers because that's just the way it was. So it's not necessarily the natural wine is what shortens the lives of it. But yeah, I mean, some of the producers that even from Bordeaux, other places that have been around even through the 70s, what would be interesting is that for those guys who basically went through perhaps that kind of a chemical production way, and then come back and taste those wines, both of them like 10, 20 years later, just to see how they stack up the next year. To me, that would be interesting to see. Because there were some producers who dipped back out there, like they started out making the way they were, and then through the invention or introduction of chemicals in the cellars and in the field, they started spraying their field and made their wines. Somehow it can get their wines before they made that chemical transition. And then from that last vintage to the new vintage of chemical transition, and then take both those wines side by side, let's say, I don't know, 20 years later, 30 years later, that would be really interesting to see if that makes any difference. Is that what you're getting at with your question? Like, does that?
I mean, just that this is a 2010 that seems at its peak, like we talked about, right? But you know, we talk about Bordeaux that are 50 years old or 60 years old or 70 years old.
This just
Like-
wasn't made to be aged for that long. I mean, this is yeah, it was never probably all that tannic and all of that. Not all Bordeaux are meant to be aged for all that long. Some Bordeaux are meant to be drunk quite young.
Yeah, I understand.
No. Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, I really like it. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah. So Woong, how do you make a wine more age-worthy? Is it you leave it on the skin so it has more tannin? Is it you pick the grapes earlier? Is it quality of the grapes? Like what are the factors that go into that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is determined by the vineyard site already, or like a vineyard, what happens in the vineyard already.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you do in the cellar, if you cannot ripen the grapes long enough, sure, you can chaptalize it and add sugar in the cellar. You can add more tannic powder and all of that. But if you can get to a certain ripeness level, you're never going to make a wine that's really ageable. But a lot of it is a combination of what happens in the vineyard in terms of site, soil, the weather is a big one, but also the grape variety themselves. Certain grape varieties just do not lend themselves to aging very long. Some do. And then a lot of it is tannin level, acid level that we talked about. The structure is important. The rest of it, the concentration, complexity, all of that is hugely determined by the work in the vineyard. So yeah, I would say the vineyard does a lot of it, but even in the cellar, short. You can extract a little bit longer. You can use more stem inclusion to extract more tannin out of wine. But some producers, like in Burgundy, where they destem all their fruits and then they still age their wines for decades. So it's not necessarily just the stems, but there's a lot of different ways to kind of extract more phenolic compounds. That is obviously oxidative qualities to it. Tannin being the most probably recognized polyphenolic compound. But yeah, so you can do all of that, but I would argue that majority of it is already determined in the vineyard by the work and the variety itself. And evidence of that is why certain vintages last much longer and certain vintages don't, even if it's in the same plot, planted the same grapes, just because the weather pattern sucked one year, right? So they would say this will all age, top out in 5 years, as opposed to one vintage, they will say this will age for 15 to 20 years. So weather is huge. I think weather plays much greater role than I think most people, this is my conjecture, a lot of people give it credit for. I would argue that climate and weather plays an even bigger role in the final wine style than even the soil type does, if you ask me. But that's a hot take.
I have a question, Un.
Yeah,
When we say drink now, how long is now?
a year, two.
A year or two? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was like 6 months or whatever, but a year or two.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, did everybody like this one? Did anybody not like this one? Just out of curiosity. Marty, since you're on the call, I'm actually curious about your opinion of this wine. Because you're such a big Bordeaux fan.
I am. There's nothing I like better than a good Bordeaux. I like the wines. I like right bank wines. I think they're, I mean, compared to the rest. This wine, I drank a glass without decanting it, and there was a lot more fresh fruit in the first glass, and it's kind of changed a whole lot. And I hate pyrazine, but with a nice balance, it's not too bad. I'm willing to take it. I got a lot of chocolate in this, that cocoa nips thing that you got.
Yeah.
I got that.
Yeah.
It's okay for Merlot.
It's okay for Merlot.
No, it's really, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
But no, I like the wine. I really do. I think I don't like that whole period of wine from the middle to late 80s, running through the early 2000s.
Yep.
And then everybody's kind of switching back again.
Yep. This is what I mean. It was the old and then
that's right.
Becoming the new again. So,
but I do like the wine. I really do.
Yeah, to me, this is reminiscent of all the basically old classic Bordeaux.
Yeah. I think what's one thing that's interesting to me, because I've got a bunch of old Bordeaux lying around.
Yeah.
And when I look at how much they cost compared to the newer vintages, it's always astounding that you can buy, and all you need is the provenance, I mean, that they've been cared for when they were stored. You can buy 30-year-old Bordeaux's that are absolutely, I mean, higher quality than anything they're making for about 25% of what the other ones are selling for.
Yeah.
It really is astounding. Doesn't happen with Burgundy.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? That's actually interesting.
I don't know. I think people don't go back and look at the ratings of the older wines. They're just reading the current releases, and the way the Bordelais market their wine, they make it kind of appealing to buy the new ones and don't encourage you to go back and look at the old ones.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, that whole old auction block and buying old wines is a game that I rarely pay attention to. So it's interesting to hear your perspective.
But I've got cases of wine, cases of Bordeaux's from the late 70s, middle 80s.
Yeah.
And I look at the price, to see, well, how much would they cost? They're really actually very nice wines. And they are $80 a bottle, $90 a bottle.
Yeah.
And then when you look at, what can you get of the same quality in a new release Bordeaux?
Yeah.
They're $200. And you say, why is it twice as much for a wine that probably isn't going to be drinkable for 10 years?
Yeah. I don't know.
And you can buy an aged wine for half the price.
Don't know the answer to that either.
Well, we'll have to buy some wine at auction and try.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Let's play everybody's favorite game. This is the part I was looking forward to. So, how much do you think this wine is on a retail shelf? How much would you be willing to pay for it? Wine that is 14 years old, cellared in the cellar's, producer's cellar for 14 years upon release last year. again, what you think of Saint-Emilion Grand Cru appellation means to you, but it is a Saint-Emilion Grand Cru. Not a classification, but appellation. Classic producer that's been making wine since 1818. How much do you think this is?
I was gonna say, wow, Dave, $330. Damn.
Yeah, okay. 35, 30, 50, 65, 40, 32. I'm surprised. I didn't, okay. I'm surprised that people thought this 14-year-old wine is gonna be that cheap. But this wine on a retail shelf will be $30. That's why it is one of my tools in my arsenal belt for so long. I've told the importer, this is a direct import, so wine tradition is a importer out of Falls Church. They're the sole United States importer for this wine. They bring in all the wines that come to the States right here. And because it's direct import, so we also get a cheaper price here because they're based out of here. But nonetheless, every year, this price has not gone up. And
How do they afford that?
exactly. And then I tell them, it's like, you can charge so much more for this wine. And they say, I know, we can, but they don't want to raise the price. And they don't. So
They're not
I don't know.
capitalists.
I don't know. I don't know.
They might be independently wealthy.
Yeah, or maybe exactly. Maybe it's the passion
I mean, the
project.
better question, Ung, is what the case club price is going to be.
Yeah, single bottle is 30. And then if you get this if you buy a case, it'd be $24 a bottle.
Can I buy
Oh,
a
wow.
future allocation?
Yeah. I mean,
It's drinking all now. I don't want to drink all the bottles.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like, I mean, this is like, especially talking about Bordeaux, Britain is the biggest export market for Bordeaux wines. Oh, actually, I don't know if it is still, but Britain played a huge role in its trade. To me, this is like I don't know, Sunday roast wine. Like, if you're having a Sunday roast, decant this bottle, sit by the fucking fireside. This is it. This is exactly what I'll be drinking when I'm eating a hunk of roast beef and Yorkshire pudding and all of that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I now know what I'm serving at the when we do our Beaujolais tasting.
Love it, love it. Also, send me the dates, yo. Let's get on the calendar.
Yeah, seriously.
Excellent. There you go. It's $30, folks, for a 14-year-old banging Bordeaux. That's what we got. Any other questions?
Wait, can you remind me it's Merlot based?
The makeup?
Yeah.
65% Merlot, 20% Cabernet Franc, 15% Cab Sauv. That's what we got here. Yep.
It's funny because if I had guessed, like, the Cab Franc is really high in this, like really prominent.
Yeah, I mean 20%. But yeah.
If you'd asked me, it would be higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, Merlot that we normally come to in the States, like California Merlot, even Washington Merlot, they don't give off a whole lot of piercing just because we pick it so ripe and then hang it for so long. Like, we just get really ripe style of Merlot. But Merlot picked earlier or grown in a cooler climate naturally is quite high in piercing. I mean, Cabernet Franc is one of its parent grape. So yeah, young Merlot or Merlot from this part, old world, is actually quite green. So that blended in with even more Cabernet Franc, 20% Cabernet Franc, definitely shows off piercing for sure. But it's not over the top though. I think the piercing here is really well melded in, kind of like Marty was talking about, just really well blended in. So. And Paul Giamatti was definitely right about the West Coast. Yeah. You don't also, Marty, you don't also hate all Merlot. You like Merlot from Friuli.
I do like Merlot from Friuli.
Yeah.
I do like Merlot from Washington State and Oregon.
Do you?
Yeah, I mean, very specific ones. I don't like the over the top fruity ones.
Yeah.
But they make some really wonderful Merlots there. They're picked
Yep.
right and they're not overly extracted. They're really nice wines.
Yep. I do. I
But
do think Merlot is one of the better grapes for Washington, for sure. I do think that. Oh. Cool. Any questions also? Marty, what's up? What come you don't have a camera on?
oh, that's okay.
Okay, fine. I don't want to put you on the spot.
No.
We've missed you, Marty. Welcome back.
Thanks, Dave.
So Marty, where are you by the way, where are you and Frank going next month? You say you guys are going on another vacation, yeah? Marty? I guess we lost him.
No,
That's
Oh,
why you don't ask
You
people
scared
to
'em
put
off.
their camera on. They will decide
No.
on their own.
we scared him off.
He does live in semi-rural Maryland, so.
all right.